Okay, welcome to another video. So in my most recent upload we checked out the 21.04 release of Ubuntu Mate, which I did actually very much enjoy. Now what we're going to be doing today is the same kind of deal with the standard version of Ubuntu 21.04. We're going to start though by very quickly looking at the release notes, and then we'll jump straight into it. So kicking off the new features of 21.04 is of course the new kernel version of 5.11. Now this includes numerous updates and added support since the 5.8 kernel, which was included in Ubuntu 20.10. They then go on to list some notable examples, and if you want to read this in full, it will be linked down below in the description. We then have some toolchain upgrades, so GCC has been updated to version 10.3.0, binutils to version 2.36.1, and glibc to 2.33. Python now ships at version 3.9.4, and Perl at version 5.32.1. LLVM now defaults to version 12, Golang defaults to version 1.16, and Rust-C defaults to version 1.50. We then have some security improvements, and the thing I'm going to be focusing on the most, which is of course the Ubuntu desktop. So first up, we have added support for smart card authentication. Wayland is now the default on most configurations, which features better security and performance. Desktop View now properly handles drag and drop interactions, for example dragging from and to the file manager, and we'll test that out once we are fully installed with the new desktop icon extension. The powerful profile mode can now be changed from the settings on configurations where there is proper kernel support. Pipewire support is now enabled, which restores working screen recording and allows for better audio handling for sandbox applications, so that's very useful. The installer includes support for specifying a recovery key, which can be used to decrypt the disk if the password is forgotten. So when we go through the installer, we are going to do the full disk encryption, so we can see how the new recovery looks all within the installer. The Active Directory integration has been improved. User authentication with GPO enabled works out of the box after installation. And then we have GNOME. So I'm sure most of us already know by now that the actual desktop it's shipping with isn't going to be the new GNOME 40 version. However, most of the applications have been updated to their GNOME 40 versions. So I've seen a few people a little bit annoyed about that, but for me it makes sense for this kind of release and gives everything a little bit more time to mature. And now Ubuntu is not the only distribution that's kind of gone this route, with the latest edition of Manjaro's GNOME doing pretty much the same thing. We then have some updated applications for Firefox, LibreOffice and Thunderbird, and updated subsystems of Pulse Audio, Bluesy and Network Manager. So with that being said, let's jump into the ISO and get this installed. Okay, so here we are in the live environment, and the ISO size for this one is around about 2.6 GB. Now I am going to be installing it to the laptop, but I've also got it up and running on the desktop, so we can test out a little game or two and see how everything's running. As per usual, for those of you who like to skip the installation parts of these videos, there's a timestamp down below which will take you straight to the desktop. With that being said, let's get this installed. So first up, we need to choose our keyboard layout, which for me is of course English UK, and then we can test the layout and make sure it's all working in the box below before we go to the next step. Next up, we have updates and other software, and I'm going to go for the full installation, which includes things like a web browser, utilities, office software, games and media players. And I'm also going to install third-party software for graphics and continue. Okay, so for installation type, we're going to do something a little bit different to what I usually do in these videos. So we are going to leave it on a erase disk and install Ubuntu, but this time we're going to go into the advanced features and select use LVM, and then we're also going to select this to encrypt the new Ubuntu installation for security, and we'll choose the security key in the next step, which is where we can check out the new recovery key. So OK and continue. And here we are. So we're going to keep it super simple with our security key. And then as you can see just below it, we have a show recovery key, but we'll go into that in just a moment. So a recovery key is generated and will temporarily be saved on the live system. You can select an alternate location, save this file and keep it in a safe place elsewhere before rebooting. So let's show you how this all works. So we've got a little recovery key here, and we can keep pressing this until we get a combination of numbers that we're happy with, and we're going to leave it like that. Now if you lose your security key, all data will be lost. If you need to, write down your key and keep it in a safe place elsewhere. Let's keep moving. And now we're going to select the disk for our installation, and it's going to be this one right about here, and continue. And that's now going to create the partitions for us. So it's now time to write those changes to disk, and as you can see there, we've got a few different partitions. So we've got an LVM LV root using ext4 as our default file system, and then we have one for our swap, and then we have an ESP partition. So let's continue, and it's now time to choose our location, which for me is of course London. Let's continue to the last step, which is going to be user creation. So Tyler, and we're going to call this one a Lappy, type in our password, and I'm not going to log in automatically, we're going to leave it on require a password to log in, and if we was a user we can go ahead and set up Active Directory from the installer here as well. So that's the installation done, so I'll pause the video here and come back once it's finished. Okay, so the installation has complete, taking no time at all on my computer, finishing in just a few minutes. Now before we go straight into it and restart and check out our freshly installed desktop, I thought I would show you quickly how the recovery key works. Let's just move that up there for the moment. So here's where it saved it by default, and if we open it up, it's going to open it in a text editor, and what I'm going to do is copy it over to my server in case we need it later. So let's copy that into my server right here, and then we've got that just any issues should arise. Let's reboot and check out our freshly installed Ubuntu desktop. Right, so we've just booted off disk for the first time, and here we are at our Ubuntu login screen. So before we log straight in, of course we are using Wayland now as our default session, but for anyone that runs into any issues, you can of course fall back onto Exorg by pressing the little cog here and then logging back in. With that out of the way, let's get into our desktop. Okay, so here we are. Now we'll quickly run through these first steps, do an update, and then we'll start checking things out. So as I'm going to use this for a few days, I usually would put Nextcloud on there, but I'll do that off camera, so we'll skip that for now. And I'll also leave that like that, I'm not too worried for the moment. I'm not going to enable location services, and done. So we've just been notified by the software updater that we do indeed have some updates to go ahead and grab. So let's check the details before we go ahead and commit to the update. So it's going to be updating the Ubuntu base as well as Nautilus. So I'll pause the video here and then we'll come back once it's finished. Okay, so we'll have a quick glance at the about section of GNOME settings, and as you can see there, we are indeed using GNOME version 3.38.5 with the windowing system being Wayland. Now before we start taking a look around at things and making any changes to our system, I am going to install htop and do a quick reboot, see how much RAM we're using, and then we'll start messing around with things, and I'm also going to install NeoFetch. Okay, so we've just booted up and run htop in the terminal. And as you can see there, it's not the lightest distribution in the world, but it is a fully fledged desktop operating system with the GNOME desktop environment, and we're using just over 800 MB. And then just below that we can indeed see it's made us a 1 GB swap partition. So we're not going to get too bogged down on the whole setup of the desktop because we've all seen Ubuntu before and not much has really changed too much in this area. However, some things that have changed, so by default the elements of the actual GNOME desktop are now going to be using the dark theme out of the box. So as you can see in the drop down for our notification shade, we're using the nice dark theme, and the same will go for your section here for your settings. Now another new feature is of course the desktop icons that will go into a bit more detail once we've got extensions installed and we can check them out. However, I do think we can also just go right click settings. We can indeed. Okay, cool. I was worried for a moment there we might actually need the extensions application to check this out, but it appears we don't. So here we've got a couple of desktop icons already for our home and rubbish bin, and then we've got some more options here. So size for the desktop icons, we're currently on standard. We can then go tiny, which is probably a little bit too tiny, and small is probably the ideal size for me, but let's also check out large. And there we go, so large is very large. So let's leave it on small. We then have show personal folder in the desktop, show rubbish bin, show external drives on the desktop, show network drives, and new icons alignment. So they're going to align on the top left corner, which is over here. However, new drives are going to go on the opposite side of the screen. So I think I'm going to go and get a USB quickly and see how that works. Okay, so I've just plugged in a USB that we used for the Ubuntu Mate video, and it has indeed put them on the right hand side of the screen with our other icons on the left. I'd rather have it all on one side, either left or right, so let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to leave it on the... No, I'm going to move that to the right, and then I guess we're going to have to manually move these, or can we do a arrange? No, so let's just move these ourselves. And what we're going to do is we're going to move these to the bottom, and then we'll move those to the top. Now whenever a new device connects or you plug something in, it will populate that and follow that sort of grid. And then other options we have are highlight the drop placed during a drag and drop. So a drag and drop is giving you that sort of blue shade there, highlighting exactly where it's going to sit, which makes it a bit easier to sort of line it up in whatever sort of layout you want. And then we have some other settings that are shared with Nautilus. So we have click type for open files, double click, which it should always be a double click, show hidden files, show a context menu item to delete permanently. Let's have a look. Let's go for, I tell you what, let's do a screenshot like so, and now let's open up our Nautilus file manager and let's test out the dragging and dropping from the file manager as well as the delete option in the right click menu. So we're going to drag it right there, and then we're going to right click on it, and let's have a look if we've got the option there to delete permanently. We do indeed. And let's now try and copy it all the way back to the same folder. There we go, so a very straightforward implementation of the desktop icons. I'm not a massive user of desktop icons, but for those of you who do sort of really do rely on it, it's nice to have a simple and easy to use implementation and not have to worry about simple things like desktop icons. So another new feature of Ubuntu 21.04 is the power modes, especially for laptops. So I checked this out on my desktop and I only had the 2 options, but if we go into power from GNOME settings, we should have a few different options here. We do indeed. So as you can see, we currently are on balanced power, but we can also go for power saver, and then we can go for high performance. Let's give it high performance a go throughout the rest of this video. Okay, so that's most of the big new features that have made it into this release. It's not the most jam-packed, feature-rich Ubuntu we've ever seen before, but there are also a lot of other little sort of visual tweaks that are going on, making the theming sort of one of the nicest releases of Ubuntu we've seen yet, with a nice consistent look. However, what I want to do is go ahead and open up NeoFetch, see how much applications we have got installed out of the box, and then we'll go through the default applications, decide what I'm not going to keep and what I need to add to it for my couple of weeks I'm going to be using this distribution. So packages wise, out of the box we've got 1719, and they are native applications of DPKG, and then we have 6 snaps. Let's quickly list those snaps. I know our store is a snap. So we've got Core 18, GNOME 334 1804, GTK Common Themes, Snap Store and Snapd. So like I said, I'm not really going to worry too much about going over how the desktop's set up out of the box, because I'm sure at this point most of us are all pretty much used to how Ubuntu operates. We have our Ubuntu dock at the left where we can pin applications, with a button at the bottom where we can get into our applications, and of course pressing the left super key will open the overview with your workspaces to the right, and we have a search bar at the top where you can search for any application and hit enter to launch that application. And speaking of applications, we're going to go over them very quickly, but we won't worry too much because nothing's really changed here apart from have more up-to-date versions of those applications. So we have Solitaire, we have Calendar, we have Cheese for our webcam, and then we have Files, which is of course Nautilus, and let's just have a little split and make sure it's all moving around nice and smoothly. And then we have Firefox as our default web browser, and in this version it ships with version 87.0. So if we go into Help and About, we can just double check that that is indeed the version we are using, version 87.0. Now let's go back into the applications, and then we have the full LibreOffice suite, and let's just quickly open that up and make sure that I'm correct in its version 7.1.2.2. So we're going to go to Help and About, and it is indeed version 7.1.2.2. And as Ubuntu is a very sort of well packaged operating system, you'll have spell check, autocorrect working out of the box with your dictionary. Let's keep moving. Let's close that one for now. And then we have Mahjong Minds, we have Remina for remote desktop viewing, and we have Rhythmbox as our music player. Let's just open that up. I've said this before, it's not my favourite music player, but we'll replace that with something else I prefer. We then have settings, Shotwell, Sudoku, text editor will be Gedit. We have Thunderbird Mail, which is a decent email client, but I'm going to replace it with Evolution. We then have To Do, transmission for our torrent files, Ubuntu software, the Snap Store, but you can install all your applications from there, I do believe. We'll get into that in just a moment. Utilities and videos, and inside utilities we're going to test out a couple of known applications and see if they're the faulty version. So the first up is System Monitor. So if we go straight into Help and About, or just About, there we go. So this is one of the applications that has been updated to 40. Now let's test it out with Calculator and see if that is also version 40. It is indeed. Let's try GNOME Calendar. There we go. Let's see what version of this GNOME Calendar is. So let's go to About Calendar, Oh, okay, so calendar isn't quite faulty yet, so calendar is version 3.38.2. Okay, I think what we're going to do now is start installing some applications of our own, changing the desktop up a bit, and we'll also test out some games and see how we go on Wayland. While I don't see why there'd be any issue playing games on Wayland, a viewer on the previous video asked me to check that out just to see if there's any performance issues playing games while in a Wayland session. Okay, so we're now in Ubuntu software, which is where you're going to install all of your new applications. So there is going to be one application I'm going to want to get as a snap. Usually I'd use Flatpak, but as we're on Ubuntu and I don't fancy going too crazy, we are actually going to use the snap version of Kdenlive. So we've got a couple of entries. The first one will probably be the native repo there of Ubuntu Hirsute Universe, and the second one should be the snap version. And if we go into the source there, we can indeed see that it's the latest version from Snap. So we'll install that one now. And I'm also going to install some native applications in the terminal, but we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, so our Snap version of Kdenlive has been installed, and let's just make sure it's appearing in our application launcher. And there we go. So we're going to close the software store for now, or Ubuntu software, and we're going to move over to the terminal to manage some more applications. So what I want to do is remove Thunderbird as well as the GNOME shell extensions for the Ubuntu dock, because I'm going to use my own extension from GNOME extensions to replace that. I actually quite like Ubuntu dock, but I want something a bit different that I can sort of customize a little bit more. Not sure what just happened to Kdenlive, but I'll get to that in just a moment. So like I said, we're going to get rid of Thunderbird and GNOME shell extension for the Ubuntu docks as well as Rhythmbox, because I am going to use a different music player. Haven't decided yet, so I'm not going to worry about installing that for now. I'm then going to install Evolution, GIMP, VirtualBox and the Guest Editions ISO, and then the Chrome GNOME shell as well as GNOME tweaks. So that should be everything. So I'll type in my password and I'll pause the video once more while these are installing, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so we are back. I've restarted, and as you can see, we no longer have the Ubuntu dock, so we could leave it like that and have more of a sort of vanilla GNOME experience. But what I'm going to do is install a dash-to-dock fork called Floating Dock. But before we do that, I'm going to go into my extensions application, and I'm actually going to disable desktop icons. I'm just not a huge user of it, and I like a more clean canvas on my desktop. And they're gone. Right, let's get some new extensions, and then after that we're going to test out a couple of different games and see how our frame rates are running on this machine, or the desktop, sorry. So let's jump straight into Firefox, and we're going to go to the GNOME extensions website. And we're going to get a couple. I think I'm only going to get user themes, we're going to get caffeine, we'll get the clipboard indicator, and like I said, we'll get a dock extension as well. First of all, we're going to need to install our browser extension right about there, and then we can start adding any extensions we see on the website. And that's one of the benefits about them not jumping over to GNOME 40 just yet. You get all of the extensions to play around with while GNOME 40 matures and has got all of them updated anyway. So let's refresh this page now, and let's go a bit crazy with the extension. So we're going to get user themes, we are going to get the clipboard indicator, we're going to get caffeine. So I've been using an extension called Espresso on GNOME 40, but I think caffeine is now also updated for GNOME 40 as well. And then we're also going to get Floating Dock. So there's two. If you wanted to use this one yourself, get this one that says a dash-to-dock fork. Floating Dock's a little bit weird. I don't hate it, but I prefer Floating Dock. So we'll get that one as well. And I think, as far as extensions go, I don't use too many extensions on GNOME. Oh, I like the sound input changer as well. There it is. Yeah, I use that quite a lot, so we'll get that as well. So we're going to install that one, like so. And then that will give us a little easy sort of sound picker if it comes up somewhere. Where are you? Okay, won't worry about that for a moment. And then we'll go for the user themes, so we can change the GNOME shell theme. However, I do really like Ubuntu's theming these days, so I might leave it on that for now. Let's get our clipboard indicator. Let's get caffeine. And then we'll, I don't know if I'm going to, oh, there's one more extension I do want as well. I'm going to get dynamic panel transparency, which is something I use quite a lot because it cleans up your desktop a bit. And I think the last one that Ubuntu had transparent panels on was Ubuntu 18.04, and then following versions didn't have the transparency anymore. But I've always quite liked a dynamic panel, so it's transparent when you're sort of not got an application full screen, and then it's a solid colour when your application touches the bar. So let's go ahead and install that, and there we go. And let's just double click that to make sure it's working nicely with this theme. Perfect. So what I want to do is just go into the extensions and just go into the settings for the dash to dock, or the floating dock that we've got on the left, and just change that up a little bit. So we've got the floating dock. I am going to leave it on the left though, but we're just going to bring that down to about 24, and we're going to change the actual transparency in appearance. So we're going to change this one to dynamic, and I'm going to go into the settings, and we're going to bring the maximum down to about 30. And then that's pretty much all I'm going to need to do on this desktop. I don't go too crazy with anything fancy. That's quite a nice clean implementation of the desktop that I'm pretty much happy with. So I think what we'll do now is we'll jump over to the desktop and test out a game or two and see how we do. Okay, so I've just played a round of CSGO, and the whole time the gameplay's been lovely and smooth, and frame rates have been exactly where I'd expect them to, around sort of 200 to 300 FPS. So I don't think that if you're a CSGO player and you're worried about sort of Wayland affecting your gameplay, you should be pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is test out Doom Eternal, and we'll see how we go. So I'm just playing a little bit of Doom Eternal, and frame rates have been at a locked 60, which is pretty much exactly what I always try and aim for on this hardware, and again Wayland has had no effect on that whatsoever. And for those of you who like a more minimal selection of applications installed out of the box, you can of course use the minimal install option built into the Ubuntu installer, and that's going to give you a lot less applications for you to choose what you want and build up from there. As you can see, you're going to be missing things like LibreOffice and your media players, etc. And as a finishing touch for my desktop, I've gone ahead and enabled the dark theme system wide. So it's no longer just the elements of the GNOME shell, it is also my applications, and I really do like the default theming that you get with Ubuntu. As much as I like the dark theme, the light theme is also very nice. Now, before I wrap it up, for those of you that were wondering why my sound picking extension wasn't working, it's because I forgot I was on my laptop, and I always have to do this on my laptop to get my sound to work. But once that's done, everything is working, so the keyboard shortcuts are all working absolutely fine. And that's going to wrap up my final look of Ubuntu 21.04. So while it's not the most exciting release ever, jam-packed full of new features, it is a solid release. So there's nice little touches here and there that make using the desktop feel a whole lot more cohesive, and I'm actually quite happy that they've made Wayland kind of like a first-class citizen. And I'm going to use this for a week or two, and I'm going to sort of do an update and talk about my experiences with Wayland and any issues that I might have faced, but I'll probably do that on the website as a blog post. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and if you've really enjoyed it, you can support me on Patreon. Join the Discord, there's a link in the description below. I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.